Hi, everyone. It's Jonathan Hung back with my Ask an Angel series, and I'm joined by one of my portfolio companies, Josh Schachter from Update AI. Thanks, Josh, for doing this.
Absolutely. This is a lot of fun. Really happy to be here, John.
Yeah, great. I love to highlight, all my portfolio companies, and you're one of my, I'm not going to say like favorite CEOs, and the other ones are going to hear, but I always think once you make that decision, once you're married, you're married. You're my baby now, right? And who can say their baby's ugly when you pick them up, right, out of the lineup? So I'd love to talk about more about Update AI, what it is, when it was founded, and what are you trying to solve for the company?
Yeah. Well, to start, I would take the accolade of your favorite CEO, just so you know. I'm just going to throw that out there if that's an option. But so I'll actually start, just kind of give the journey a little bit. We are bringing customer intelligence to customer success. We've identified lots of gaps. Customer success is burgeoning like nuts. It's exploding within SaaS companies, and we know that SaaS companies are exploding within the general market. And yet it is still underserved, undernourished, we believe. And there's certain gaps that we're helping to solve. So for us, our origin story is that I had just come from, about a year ago, I had just come from Boston Consulting Group. I was at the Digital Ventures, the startup studio there, building startups, team manager. And there's so much noise in information and communication that occurs these days, especially in this remote environment. We have all these, back-to-back Zoom calls and other conferences and things of that nature. So we said, how can we be smart about reducing some of that noise, filtering some of that out? And then we just started talking to people and understanding what their workflows were like. And we realized that meetings were a really important part of the key information that teams really need to hold on to stay aligned. What key decisions are made or need to be made? What open questions are there? What action items need to be fulfilled? What blockers are there? All those things. And then we said, okay, great, but let's look a little bit bigger picture. Coming out of 2020 and a lot of the perils that we've seen, right? We knew that there was going to be this Red Sea of meeting tools out there, and we just didn't want to be, kind of lost in that fray. And so we said, okay, we're going to find a specific function to focus on. And that's where CS came up. CSMs are the lifeline of many organizations, and yet they're in back-to-back meetings. They're multitaskers. They have internal folks to coordinate with, external, and it can be a very frustrating job. So we exist to help relieve some of that pressure and stress, and to help them run better meetings. And then we have a longer term vision about helping them build stronger relationships with their customer stakeholders.
Oh, wonderful. So I'd love to ask this question. You've been basically somebody who's helped build other people's companies as an entrepreneur, as working as a consultant at BCG, essentially. What would you say is different now that you are actually the founder versus you helping somebody build their company?
What's the quote around only the paranoid survive?
Yeah, only, right? That's from Andy from Intel.
Right? Yeah. And so when you are, because I was a founder, this is my third startup of my own, right? This is the most substantial. But then over the past decade or so, I've straddled my career in intrapreneurship, as they call it, right? So corporate entrepreneurship. I went to eHarmony and was helping them build out a new product, a new dating product for the mainstream market. I worked at the NFL and some new products, and then Intuit at a startup they had acquired. And then at BCG, where we were actually founding these startups. And so I always felt like a founder. But now that it's my own, you have those sleepless nights, right? And it is, you always feel in the hot seat, but you are so motivated by them because you have such a passion and a vision, and a greater sense of control for what you're able to do. I think one of the things that this has enabled me to get back into coming out of the consulting world, the studio world over the past 5 years, is making really quick decisions, being able to make really quick decisions and try to prove and demonstrate value as quickly as possible. And focus really more on the execution as opposed to on executive stakeholdering and storytelling up to executives to get them to agree to a certain decision, which always slows things down a little bit.
Got it. No, really interesting. Yeah. And so then we talk about team. I always tell everybody, like, when we make these early bets, it's not just about like the idea that we're making the bet on, it's really the team. And, I know about your team, but I'd love for you to tell everyone who's listening in, like, how did you build your team, especially a leadership team, and how you got to this point and what you think you'll need for the future?
Yeah. So there's the, what's the movie in the 80s with Alec Baldwin? He won the Oscar where he's in one scene.
Oh, Glengarry Glen Ross, ABC, always be closing, right?
Yeah, always be closing, right? I think if you're an entrepreneur, you just like, it in your gut, and like, even if you're working as a corporate monger, I might say, right? Like you're always aware and like motivated to do something again on your own later in your career. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, you want to be a good person and have good values and whatnot, but that also motivates you to build relationships that could help you later in your career, right? So I was at a place like BCG, Digital Ventures, knew that there were all these entrepreneurial people that were really multifaceted and really strong performers, and yet they were going to want to kind of eventually be unleashed into something more entrepreneurial on their own, like myself. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, this wasn't the sole reason by any means, but I really kind of focused on building those relationships. And then when it came, then flash forward, I've got my own thing now. Mm-hmm. Now you have all kinds of connections of folks that you can go back to for advice, for soundboarding, different angles and perspectives. And if you've done a good job through your career and being a good person, people will want to work with you, right? And I think we've been really blessed that some folks that I'd worked with in the past, really, we had a good working rapport. Mm-hmm. We brought them on slowly, and then they've been able to be part of really leading what we're doing. Ultimately, find good people that you enjoy being in the company of. Maybe it's a little less important now with remote working, but good people that you can really kind of build a rapport with, and you agree with their kind of working values. And my co-founder, Bill Gross, is exactly that person. I mean, Bill is the godfather, if you will, of startups in Los Angeles. I have so much admiration and respect for him. Didn't know him, beyond a year ago, and we got together. We were talking about some ideas, and we started focusing on Update. He came in and became involved with me on that. But he's just so winsome and so just has so much enthusiasm for what he's, the products that he works on, and the people that he works with. They've all worked with him and for him for like 20 years. It's crazy. And so through him, we've also been able to get other introductions. And so slowly, we just kind of one by one, bringing on folks like yourself. They're just good people that we love to have part of the family. And we really focus on making it a family type of culture. Sorry, it's a long-winded answer. It's something that I'm really passionate about, team. And I'm happy to talk about some tactics and stuff like that I put together on how to build that community.
Yeah, I'd love to.
I come from a family of folks. My brother and my sister-in-law are neurologists. Wow. My mom just retired as a social worker. My dad was a primary physician. So I come from a family that like really focuses on like kind of that psyche and like the relationships. And so for me, it's always just been a really kind of a fascination and something I want to focus on.
Okay, wonderful. And when we talk about with all my founders, and just the drain of fundraising, right? I mean, funding is always a concern. How has it been going for you? What do you think? Like, how have you found your investors? How do you feel like going forward? Is it getting easier or harder from the initial checks that you've gotten now versus going forward? What do you think?
We're really excited about going forward. I mean, I'm still waiting, I suppose, for the foot to other, or the shoe to the other shoe to drop, right, so to speak. But so far, things have been pretty graceful, and we've had a lot of enthusiasm and wind behind us. It helps when your co-founder is a person like Bill Gross, and he's able to make connections, and immediately that adds credibility. It helps that this isn't my first startup. I've done this before. I'm a little bit longer in the tooth myself, and so I think because at this stage of our company, about a year old, you're investing in the person. right? There's going to be so many twists and turns. You're investing in the team. So people see Bill, then maybe I'm the shadow of Bill, right? And that's helped us get those relationships. And it's been great. I think I've tried to, for investors that we built relationships with in the previous round, right, when you came in, and we had a really good rapport, and they were really interested, and it just wasn't quite, ready for them, or the timing wasn't right or whatever. I've made sure to really kind of keep them looped in. So, because it's dating, right?
Yep.
Like it's not going to happen overnight. Right. You need to build the relationship.
Yep.
Our company, Update AI, is in the business of relationships, and so we've been building that relationship with them more longitudinally, knowing that they can come back into the picture in future rounds, which we're about to go after, later in this fall.
That's great. And Josh, I'd love to ask you, what's your ideal type of investor? Someone who's hands-on, or be able to, or hands-off, or can make the right connections, or someone who has a certain type of expertise? Like, what do you look for now going forward? Because it's different when you're like starting out and you're having really angel investors and high net worth individuals before going into real true institutionals. Because for those, they want a set number of things that they need to see before they even consider writing a check.
Yeah. It is different, but there's a lot of similarities too. So I look to work with people, again, it goes back to good people that you just feel a good rapport. You and I have a really good rapport. Our lead investor in the previous round, Alan Morgan, he and I, we joke around, have a really good rapport. I feel like I'm able to, maybe not 100%, and that's probably a good thing, but I'm able to be vulnerable. Right. And expose myself, so to speak.
Exactly.
Right?
Absolutely.
And that's really important, because otherwise it's like you're in it alone, and that can really kind of play mind games with you. So I look for folks that can be there with advice on how they've structured deals before, because everything in life and in building a startup is all about pattern recognition. Right. So you get folks that have done this before, that can lend from that experience, that are not going to get phased when there's news that's not the greatest, or when they're still learning. And then I think at this point now, I also want to go after strategic investors, the folks that have experience in B2B SaaS, the folks that have experience in customer success, because again, there's lots of knowledge and patterns that we can lend from. We're not yet at the point where, just a $50 million check or whatever, it doesn't really matter who it's come from, right? We still need some guidance and mentorship.
Great. So then let's explore the B2B world, right? I mean, tell me about the sales cycle. What have you learned? Because you do a lot of piloting, of course, and it's not as easy where it's like a consumer product where it's like, okay, this is it. This is the drink. This is, the cream that you put on your face for skincare. It's a little bit more complex. It's more longer tail. I'd love for you to tell the audience what your experience has been like and what you've done before, previously helping people do B2B versus now in the world of sales of B2B software.
I think, you have to be much more patient, because it takes longer to prove out. But there's a benefit to that too, right? It's not like you get the first download, and then if the first time user experience is flat, then they're never coming back to you. I think earlier on, I've come from product management, right, in my career, and I kind of have this framework of this Venn diagram of how to make product decisions. You've got one part is the qualitative research. The other circle is your quantitative numbers, or stats, metrics. And then you've got your product intuition, your Steve Jobs stuff, what you believe really in your gut. And then kind of the overlap of those is where you make your decisions. You're going to get more qualitative stuff in the very beginning with your B2B, because you're not going to have your consumer grade scale of numbers to look at. So you want to stay very quantitative and obviously have the reporting and the metrics in place and whatnot. But it's really about building the relationships with your users who eventually you hope to convert to customers. And it's a little bit meta because we are in the business of customer success now. But you want to nail the customer success, right? You want to capture the voice of the customer, understand their frictions, understand the language that they're using and mirror that language. and think about, ideas against the different frictions that they tell you about. You want to hold focus groups and recurring feedback sessions with them, and slowly build those building blocks of your product over time. It can be tough. I had a startup that I had on the side when I was in business school at UCLA. UCLA actually came on board to become our first customer, which was amazing. And they were really kind in supporting my co-founder and I to do that. I ultimately bowed out of that business because the sales cycle in academia was just going to be too daunting. In admissions that we were working in, so you have to really kind of be smart about that up front too. A lot of folks have encouraged us to focus on sales enablement in our platform because it's such a huge market, and they have the budget and they have usually the executive sponsorship to buy software and tools. And we've said no. Maybe one day we go towards that, but our focus is on customer success. But we know that there's a risk there that today, and I think it will change. I know it will change. But today, it's still under budgeted, doesn't have quite the same seat at the table. So you have to be aware of like the buying patterns and how people are making their decisions for B2B SaaS.
Yeah. No, wonderful. And I'd love to talk about, your competitors in this space. What do you think? Not that what they're doing wrong, but what is it that's different that you can latch onto now? Because we always talk about there's only a certain amount of money and a certain amount of time you can focus on when you're a startup. Like even if you're Microsoft or Google now and you have all this huge expenses, it still takes time to build. It's like the question, because I tell people someone who's doing a B2B sales, the sales to people was that hey, they might have a budget internally that they could build something, but they might want to just acquire because it's easier because Josh and the Update AI team figure out something that it would have taken them even longer to do.
Yeah. So our competitors. So like I said, we knew that there were going to be dozens of meeting, note-taking, meeting productivity apps out there. We're right. Zoom Apps just launched about 3 weeks ago globally, publicly, which is a really great new platform. I'm very bullish on Zoom as a platform, the growth of this company. And I think this is one of the things that's going to help propel them even further. But of course, there's lots of note-taking apps. What is the first feature of our product? Note-taking, right? Our artificial intelligence detects when there's an action item overheard and helps you take notes and share those meeting recaps. That's what we're doing right now in our product. There's my little plug. But we intentionally didn't want to compete in that space. So the vision for us really, again, along the lines of customer success, which is on the fringes of sales and vice versa, our more apparent competitors right now are Gong and Chorus. Usually about a third of the conversations I get are, so this is like Gong.io, right? And Gong has taken sales enablement by storm over the past year or so. They recently were valued at $7.5 billion. I've heard from sources, so I don't know if it's confirmed or not, that their ARR is 75 million. So they have 100x valuation on their ARR. And then just last month, Chorus was acquired by ZoomInfo for 600 million, right? Those are they're kind of paupers, I suppose, compared to Gong. Which is, by the way, interesting. As a side story, I recently heard both these companies started out with kind of doing the same thing, and they really do most of the same stuff. Chorus decided to build out the technology and focus on the technology, and I'm generalizing here, right? And I'm also telling you second, third hand. But Chorus was focusing on building out the product and tech, and Gong said, we're going to build out the brand, reputation, and the marketing. And then our tech and product is going to catch up to that. And they were that's what propelled them, right? So even despite their kind of their numbers, their growth has been pretty extraordinary. But anyway, so we're in the same kind of mental model as those guys, but we exist to serve the end user, our end user being customer success managers. So we are there to help them prepare for meetings, to help them during the meeting so they can stay more present with their customer and build that relationship, to help relieve a little bit of the pressure on them of note-taking. After the meeting, to integrate those recaps, those action items into their existing workflow. That's substantially different than Gong's core proposition of, and I'm going to, be curt with it, and it probably doesn't do it justice, but let my manager play Big Brother, right? Let my manager watch my videos of my sales calls and help coach me. It's different vibe and tenor, and in nuanced ways that impacts our product. And then the other thing is that when we think about the future of our product, we are going to be in a position to detect the strength of relationship between company and customer, different stakeholders. And we're going to be doing a lot of things around champion development and identifying and customer advocacy and identifying which accounts have those champions, have those customers, what the relationships are like. I don't believe that that's the game that Gong and Quartz are in. They are doing sales revenue intelligence, which is a different spin, but they're not in that same world long term.
Got it. No, great. Thank you, Josh. And stepping back a little, what would you give advice as a young founder trying to bring their vision to life? Because I know you've worked with the students. It's a passion project of yours, and what advice would you give them as on the path of being an entrepreneur or a founder?
I guess based on what you said there, I would find a mentor, right? I would surround myself with people that I want to work with and learn from, right? So whether it's people to start a startup with me as my co-founder, or whether it's somebody who's done this before that I can piggyback ideas off of, or somebody who I can build a relationship with and they can invest in me. My first startup back in 2008, I actually wasn't intending to raise money. I had a business plan. I had a passion for ice hockey. I still do, but I had a business plan around sports social media. And an alumnus at my college that I had been corresponding with because of some other club sports and stuff at the school. I started going to him for feedback on my business plan and continued to go to him. And I didn't even know, this is silly, right? But this is the type of thing you create your own luck. I didn't even know he was a startup investor. And then at one point he said, well, if you're going to talk to that vendor or whatever, tell them that you have a potential investor, you're working with. I'm like, wait, you might invest in my company? He ended up being my biggest investor. But it was building the relationship naively, but just kind of from learning from him, right? Learning how to do business. So learn from others. I'd say the other thing is just trial and repetition. I've had so many one-pagers that I've written, different silly ideas that I've tried to create a prototype for, and then the next week I said that was the worst idea of my life. Of course, I've had my own startups. I've had startups at places like BCG where every 9 to 12 months we're working on something new. And I've learned all my lessons. I'm hoping that I've gotten all my failure lessons out of my system now. Right. But that's almost like a rite of passage in entrepreneurship is failure. When you think about it. And I was embarrassed about that earlier in my career. And now I'm not, because now if I've failed, the only failure is if you don't learn from that. So, take those lessons with you, memorialize them, write them down, go back to them. Remember what worked and what didn't work. And then over time, you'll build up your playbook.
Great. Wonderful. And, so then, I think we're always learning every day. And so I'd love to hear, what are you doing is there certain books or podcasts or that you tell your team to listen to, and entrepreneurs you think you consider that can inspire you and find ways of learning? Because I always think it's all about being able to learn. I always tell when I go meet new people, they're like, "Oh, you have so many degrees," and I just people, yeah, well, it's just it's not because I love school, it's because I love to learn and understand things. Because you got to keep discovering. Because if you're doing the same thing you were doing 2 years ago, you're doing something wrong for your business.
There's lots of stuff. I have so many books. Here's one within my reach, right? So Nick is a guy, Nick's the CEO of Gainsight. I'll pitch his book. This is a great book. Him and Allison Perkins used to run marketing. I'm just reading about customer success. I've got a few customer success books. So learn about what the space you're in is one. But I do think there's actually an advantage that I came from not within CS, right? Have that outside perspective as well. Podcasts. I love Guy Raz's How We Built This or How I Built This. That's great. You learn the lessons through hearing stories of the founder of Whole Foods and founder of Five Guys Burgers and this and that, right? I love watching Shark Tank. I'm blanking on the name, but Reid Hoffman's podcast about founder stories. He has a book on that as well. So you can just learn from stories of others. Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 talks about the lessons of how he's launched products in the very early days. Fred Wilson has had great blogs. What is the one I was actually thinking about last night that he talks about? Do things that break, right? When you first start out, things that break, that won't do things that won't scale, right? To iterate. I'm big into that 0-1 space, right? Lean Startup by Eric Ries, right? Like, Crossing the Chasm was a book that I read. It's an older book now. It's 25 years old by Jeffrey Moore. I love that book. I still have that book on my bookshelf. It talks about finding your beachhead, finding your entry point, right? And then his next book, Inside the Tornado, talks about like when you are the David going up against Goliath, how do you approach that? Mark Benioff's book about Salesforce was a great read. It talks about his stories at Salesforce, how he created this new industry and he was going up against the titans of previous, on-premise software. Play Bigger is a book that I recently read, which talks about market definition and defining your own category. So we've gone out there now and tried to define our own category based on that. And then the last one, I know I'm going on here. I don't read that much, but I like to at least buy the books. The Growth Mindset. It's not about business, but there's pretty much a chapter for every facet of life. It's by Carol Dweck. She's a PhD. I think she's a psychologist. Growth Mindset. And it just talks about having a growth mindset as opposed to having this fixed mindset. And effectively, the biggest lesson there is not to let things affect you as much, because life is really all about progress and growth. And you can take that into relationships, you can take that into your finances, you can take that into your professional life, you can take that into family, whatever it is. That book has really kind of inspired me and changed the way that I think. Of course, I have to go back to it every once in a while to be reset, because the fixed mindset stuff does come, does creep in.
Wonderful, Josh. And I guess my next question is about, like, how do you hire? Like, how do you find the right engineer or the right customer service person or the sales rep or whoever you need to build your team? Like, what do you look for in the right people to join Update?
I like to see some form of excellence generally, like whether it's academic excellence, right? They've had, superlative scores on their standard tests, or, really good GPAs, or, attended some pretty notable schools, which can be, that can be signaling, it can be false signaling too. Right. But those things are important. It's really important in conversations that you can just have a really smooth conversation and you feel comfortable, right? There was a quote once somebody told me, like, the team that drinks together stays together type of thing, right? Maybe to an extent, right? But there is some value in that, I think. So you need, like, I recently read this article. Another source of good reading is First Round Capital's blog, and it talks about the things you should to note if you're not most of the articles are about, like, for founders and entrepreneurs, but this one was for people that are joining startups, and it talks about how everyone needs to be a cultural ambassador. So making sure that there's a culture fit is really important. And now, most recently we were hiring some data scientists, and I deferred, the judgment really to my teammates, to the existing data science cohort. Of course I need to make sure they check some boxes on my end, but it's important to round out the perspective and get a 360 view of folks from different people that you deputize, right, in the recruiting interview process. It shouldn't just be based solely or majorly, the majority on your own judgment.
No, wonderful. No, it's great advice. And Josh, I'd love to answer any questions that you may have from me. Like, please, love to hear.
Yeah. So you've been doing this for a while, John.
2012
you've had
an venture capitalist investor, and then 2007 as a public equities investor. Yeah.
Wow. And I know you've had some good ones and some good hits. You've had you've had a bit of a Midas touch, which I think is amazing. Well, I mean, so I would deem you as a successful investor, somebody, who I'd want to track your syndicate, let's say, right? What do you attribute that to? Like, what do you think is your superpower as an investor?
Honestly, for me, it's like I might have the degrees, like you mentioned, and maybe the GPA. I was a horrible standard test taker, so I don't attribute anything to that. For me, it's always been about I'm naturally introverted. It's like, and people think that's funny when I say that because I'm outgoing, I'm extroverted, I laugh, have a good time, we're gonna go drink, like yeah, have a great time, right? Like people see me as like, oh, this is Jonathan Hung, Ask an Angel, right? Well, there's Jonathan and there's Johnny. And Johnny is like a totally different fun guy, like when I talk to people and they're like, oh, well, then they call me Jonathan and like in a business setting. Yeah, that's a business setting. But like, if we know each other as like Johnny on like, hey, another level, that's how I can build true trust and relationships with. I think I'm somebody who's, you're only as good as your word. I never try to be someone who over promises and under delivers. That's the worst. When I see people and they just have delusions of grandeur, it just makes no sense. Because it's like, why would you lie about that stuff? I always tell my best trade is like one of my business partners told me, Philip Seraphin said, hey, Johnny always under promises and over delivers. And that's the kind of like reputation I love for people to know about me. And that's why I can come in and say like, listen, let me be of service. Let me find ways of helping you. Adam Grant has a great book about give and take, right? And I don't think I'm someone who just takes or I'm just a matcher. I definitely think about giving first. I actually had an exit recently, and the first thing I thought about was like, okay, I have to give back, and I had a fellowship that I did in honor of my father, or there's a charity I sit on the board of. Like those were the first two purchases, that I used yesterday. I literally did that yesterday. And that's going to help because, you pay it forward because everyone's going to need help.
Yeah, that's great. The one thing I know about you is that you're a master of relationship building, right? And I think that's really important to be that connective node for people. And you're right, it's not just the take, it's the give and take. Yeah. Where did you learn to become an investor? How?
You know what? I saw this so interesting I saw it not because my dad taught me, but I saw it from the people that he's surrounded with. It's weird when you think about your parents. It's like, oh, that's your mom or dad. And when you see them in a business setting, it's totally different. It's like, who is this person? Because this person's just yelling at me. It was like, oh, because they're being a parent first and foremost, no question, right? They're not your buddy, right? A parent's job is not to be your best friend. It's great if you are that. But then seeing my father in a business setting, and like one of our sales reps told me this one time, and they said, you know what your father is really good at? He understood someone's weaknesses. And he didn't mean like, oh, they're scared of like bees or snakes or, their heights. He meant he's just like, he knows how to open up somebody and say like, oh, their weakness is their children. Like they love talking about their children, or they love talking about the Yankees. Or they love talking about the Lakers, or they love talking about like going skiing or going vacationing. And you find what people really, truly are passionate about that gets them going, and then you can build rapport. It's not about just money, and like how much money you can make for someone. It's really about understanding what makes them tick, and that's their weakness. And it's like, oh, like you just melt them away. And if you can do that, and you can be able to talk to somebody and see like, oh yeah, listen, let's go to this game together, or let's try this restaurant, or let's go, explore this city together. Then you could build rapport and you let people, everyone has their guards up. And then people are more willing to help once you lower their, their defenses.
Yeah. All right. My last question for you then is very interesting for me. Why did you invest in Update AI?
Why did I update? Excellent question. And I'll tell you what, like, I couldn't do it for our fun. I couldn't do it for our fun. Unfortunately, my other partner thought it was way too early, which is true. I don't doubt that whatsoever. It was way too early. But for me, I'm still a gambler. I'm an angel investor at heart. And it's something about, how you are so organized, how you were able to assemble a rock star investor team. And it wasn't just you had Bill Gross on your team as well, because it was more about who you were and your background and how you run a meeting, for example. It's very interesting to me. And that's something where it's just like, yeah, it makes me want to bring other people to the table. It was really based on you as the founder. The idea, I think it's brilliant. I think, listen, someone's going to be able to do it no matter what. It's just like talking about space travel. Like, that's going to happen. We don't know who's going to win out, but that's going to happen. But talking about this, like, it made perfect sense. And I said, you know what, with your background, with who you've assembled, let's take a bet. Let's take a bet. Let's go for it. Because I've seen that with other people where it's like, you know what, I made a mistake of investing on the idea where I should have invested on the person. And that's what I'd like to do. It's more, to me, less science than art when it's this early of an investment. If it's a pre-seed, which where you're at, and you're going to raise your seed coming up, and in the beginning of 2022, which I know you'll take care of because you're going to have the metrics, you're going to have the success, you've done this before, we're going to get there. Now, I always tell people, there's no guarantee, you're going to go to, I just tell people, I get you through high school, right? I mean, I take care of a company up to a $20 million valuation, give or take, plus or minus, right? And then it's up to the next person, your next professor to take you to the next milestone. But I think that's what I see, because I want to see, like, are you able to want to go to school? In a sense, the quote unquote school. Are you willing to do the work? Because not everybody wants to do the work. Everyone wants to take the shortcut. And because if you have a true dedication and passion, that stands out. You can tell just by talking to people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for the kind words. It reminds me, one of our other investors, who's a known, very well-known investor, I had coffee with him, and he said, Josh, in my career, I've made money in two ways: investing too early and investing way too early. So
it's true. It's true.
Yeah. But it takes some guts, for sure.
You have to be a gambler, no question. You have to dream big. But it's like, everything I think about, like, I know I've lost, millions of dollars, but I made it as well. And it's just that I get satisfaction with people who, didn't leave anything behind. That they didn't, like, they really did everything they could to try. And if you try, that's all that really truly matters. There are people who I think I have investments where they're just like, oh, I just recently reduced my salary because of, it's 2021. It started in the beginning of 2020, and that's just character. And it's just, what, we made a mistake on character, and that's why I try to focus that now, because I'm only as good if I'm improving as an investor and a recognizer of talent, and I keep getting that going forward with each person I invest in.
Well, thank you for your trust and support.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I hope I definitely learned a lot more, and I'm sure everyone else will too. Thank you.